Linda, welcome to the Childhood Potential Online Montessori Conference. Again, I'm really glad that you have accepted to be the speaker again.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me, Lucy. I really appreciate it. I love I love childhood potential. It's my favorite.
That's great to hear. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. I will say a few words about you, and then I will give you space to add something more. You are the founder of the Montessori Teacher, an
Mhm.
organization committed to making high quality Montessori education accessible to homeschooling parents, home based educators, and families worldwide. You
That's
have
right.
more than 16 years of experience across public, private, charter, and home based education.
Mhm.
You are also an author of the forthcoming book, The Montessori Homeschooler.
Woo!
So I want to ask
Exciting.
about that.
Yeah, let's
And yay, tell us more.
yeah. So I'm so excited about Ms. Bug, and I'm not going to talk for forever about it, but it's forthcoming and it's going to be coming in the fall 2025. I'm actually finalizing my manuscript right now, and um, then the PR and everything else begins. But it is going to be published by a very reputable publishing company, Wiley Josie Base, which I'm going to pull something up here because it's kind of a cool story. So, this book here called The Art of Coaching by Elena Aguilar is published by Josie
Just
Base,
nice.
right? And Wiley. So, this is my publisher. And it's so interesting because the approach that I take to teaching and coaching people is instructional coaching. And instructional coaching has been around for quite some time. And it's actually, a whole career, right? Uh, and so this book is one of the first books that really helped make instructional coaching make sense to me when I was just beginning as an instructional coach years and years ago. And it almost feels like a 360
Mhm.
that the publishing company that published the book that I started out with is now publishing my book, The Montessori Homeschooler, which the subtitle is A Practical Guide to Getting Started. So it's going to be for those people, similar to what we're talking about today, those people who are trying to orient themselves to homeschooling, looking at it as an option, getting informed on the decision making, what is Montessori, just kind of getting very clear on what everything is, and then what exactly do I need to actually make this happen, and then how do I get it up and running um, in an authentic, um, high integrity, high fidelity type of way without so that we're not compromising the quality of Montessori education in a home-based setting. So I'm really excited about that
That sounds really
one.
cool. Yay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, we are supposed to talk about Montessori homeschooling.
Mhm.
So, what does Montessori homeschooling look like, and how is it different from traditional homeschooling?
Yeah. So Montessori homeschooling is really rooted in child centered, hands on learning, and it emphasizes this independence exploration that we all see all over the place. Like we know what that outcome is. Traditional homeschooling follows a teacher led curriculum typically. And it can be a bit of a hybrid with hands on learning in textbook based. So the approach is quite different Montessori homeschooling versus traditional. Montessori homeschooling is really focused on creating a prepared environment where children can engage with the materials and the materials are aligned to the needs of the child. In a traditional homeschool setting, the environment's not really a thing, right? And we see a lot of homeschoolers homeschooling on their kitchen table. They are homeschooling, outside, wherever, calling, kind of sometimes there's an overgeneralization that all learning is education versus differentiating. education and learning, right? The education as a process by which we learn. And in Montessori, it is that prepared environment makes a huge difference. It's one of the pillars, as you know. But let's talk about some key differences. Well, the first key difference in a Montessori homeschool, just if you're taking notes, people taking notes out there, is the role of the adult. In a Montessori environment, the adult, the parent, acts as a guide rather than a teacher, right? And that's quite different because a teacher is focused on giving information and a guide is focused on facilitating experiences. And that's quite different. We are not focused on us having all the right answers. We're not the keepers of knowledge. We see that the child has that potential, which is the name of your conference, right? So and that is what we're guiding. We're guiding that potential through learning experiences. Number two, the environment, like we talked about. Montessori emphasizes having a very beautifully, thoughtfully designed space with materials to encourage exploration and skill building. In traditional, that's not the case. And then two more. The third one is individualized learning, and that's different than differentiated learning. And this is something, if you're new to homeschooling, I would encourage viewers to really look into the difference between individualized learning, personalized learning, and differentiated learning, because a lot of people use those three interchangeably, and it's nuanced, but it is actually quite different. And in Montessori, we follow individualized learning. We follow the child's pace. We incorporate their interest into what they're learning, but we are following their development. And that's important because a lot of people say, well, if we're following their interests, is it interest based? And some might argue yes. I argue no, because I know how homeschoolers interpret what interest based means. And interest based means it's typically interpreted as, oh, my child really likes dinosaurs. And now we're just going to do some dinosaur activities. And that it gets oversimplified to that when that is not the case. So look into individualized, personalized, and differentiated. And then the last thing is, of course, practical life. In Montessori, practical life, I can talk all day, and I think we had a whole conference about practical life. It's just so, so important. It's not just taught in isolation through the materials and through in your learning space and through the education that you're offering your child. When you're homeschooling, it really is integrated into everyday tasks also, not in place of, but also like cooking and cleaning and gardening and all of these things. And those experiences are considered just as essential as academic skills. So Montessori homeschool is following the approach, the philosophy, and now when you're educating your child, you're also following the Montessori method. So that's the best answer I could give you. Good? Yeah.
Perfect. At what age do
Mm.
we talk about Montessori homeschooling?
I love that you bring this up because I really think that it's important to think of Montessori homeschooling like starting a children's house. So when would you be putting your child in school? Typically around 3 years old if you were going to go to a Montessori school. And why? Because at that age, the mind becomes conscious, and now we can start actually making meaning of what we're learning. And so in Montessori homeschooling, it's the same thing. I think that a lot of people, because it's so fuzzy, sometimes Montessori at home and Montessori homeschooling, because you can be doing both when you're homeschooling, you can do both, and you actually probably are. Um, it's not one and the same though. Montessori at home is really about following the philosophy, and a philosophy is just a broad set of beliefs. And Montessori has very universal um, universally appealing beliefs like respect for the child, whatever, whatever. And so you can follow the philosophy more broadly and you can maybe be inspired by it and incorporate some things into your home, cooking, cleaning, maybe have a little hand washing station, something like that. But when we're talking about homeschooling, we're really talking about the Montessori method of education and following the child's development so that they learn academics, grace and courtesy in a little bit more structure, not as structured as traditional. So that typically begins right around age 3. Before then, I would say in a home environment, it is Montessori at home. It is Montessori at home.
Thank you. How can parents use the infant and toddler years to prepare for the follow up successful Montessori homeschooling?
I think it's important to think of it as laying a strong foundation for Montessori homeschooling or Montessori education, honestly, in general. Because even if you decide, hey, homeschooling's not for me, and you're choosing to keep your child at home during those infant toddler years, like a lot of parents do. And if you're able to, then, I'm a big supporter of that. Um, but in preparation for that children's house phase of Montessori, it is important to think of 0 to 3 as laying the strong foundation. And so this means that we really want to focus on kind of fostering their curiosity and like nurturing their love of learning. Those early years are really, really important for developing habits, for developing skills, and more importantly, in my opinion, is for internalizing values. Because that is where, as we know in early education, 0 to 6, 0 to 5, new research says 0 to 5, give or take a year. Um, that's where their character development, and that is when all of these values are really becoming part of who they are. So I would say that a couple of practical things that you can do in those infant toddler years are fostering independence by allowing them to explore and let them do things themselves a little bit. You know what I mean? So I know that this is really hard. It was so hard for me. It was probably the hardest. I was that parent. It was so hard. But I think that it's important. And you can do this in a prepared way to make you feel more comfortable as an adult because sometimes it's like I can let go, but like when does the let going start and where does the let going end? Sometimes it feels kind of ambiguous to say, like, just let them. And some people oversimplify it to almost negligence, even. So I would say, maybe create some practical life activities, right? So if you're able to control the environment and you intentionally prepare something for them to just explore, this helps you as a parent let it go a little bit because you understand the function and the purpose of that material. And the function and purpose of that material is not necessarily the activity itself, but it's more about allowing them to do things independently, encouraging them to be curious about it. So, having some practical life activities available, like some, putting toys away, wiping spills, doing some dry pouring. If you have a toddler, the wet pouring, I don't know, maybe get a little bin or something, right? But you can prepare the environment so that they can do this. Child-sized tools are also very popular. Making sure you're incorporating them into everything that you're doing in the home. Give them an opportunity to be a part of it. And this is so interesting to me, by the way, just like as a side note, because a Montessori classroom is intended to replicate the home, not the other way around. And so much of what we see on social media are parents, Montessori inspired parents, replicating a Montessori classroom. And it's like, no, no, that's a huge misconception. you're already in the home, right? So having an entire other kitchen for your child is useless. It doesn't serve the function and purpose that it does in the classroom, because typically classrooms don't have kitchens, right? Functioning kitchens. And so we create it and we make it accessible, what have you. In the home, it's a very different dynamic. So instead of creating these spaces that are going to push your child and disconnect your child from you, connect with them, do things together. Get a stool to make things accessible. Get a little low, like, shoe shelf by the kitchen where they can have their utensils and they can have things that are accessible and prepared for them. That's very, very important. So, creating a prepared environment for your toddler does not mean replicating the classroom. It means recognizing that the home is what inspired Montessori in the first place, and fostering that connection and that independence, that accessibility within your home. Is that helpful? Good.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah. You talked about the prepared environment, about the practical life. Are there some other, habits or routines or practices that can help parents establish now to make the transition to homeschooling smoother later on?
Ah, yes, I'm so glad you asked. There are some things that you can do. So, other than what we talked about of preparing the home, and making it more accessible and prepared for the child, not replicating spaces, but making the existing spaces prepared and accessible. Um, when your child is a little bit older, maybe around 2 or so, it is helpful to start um, distinguishing in the home. And this is something that is not the case in the classroom. And this is why it's so important to always keep the context and the environment within which Montessori is taking place. Because the environment, right, is social, it's emotional, um, it is also physical, but it's also cultural. And homeschooling is a culture, right? It is a whole culture, and it there's a whole different dynamic going on when the parent is the guide, the teacher, the parent, the peer, and all of this kind of stuff. And so it can become very convoluted. And if things are not clear to the child, it's very difficult for the child to become independent, right? It's very similar to us, just in general. If you are given a deadline, or somebody gives you some expectations and they say, yeah, just do it whenever you want, you do whatever you want, it becomes very overwhelming, very ambiguous. But when we're able to add a framework, right? Limits, freedom within limits, it becomes a little bit clearer for us to be able to become more independent. And so in the home, that clarity of expectations is very, very important. So something you can begin early on is learning how to unpack your own expectations, know actually what it is, and start working on clarity in your communication, right? There's not this ambiguity that is promoted, doesn't help when you're trying to homeschool. If your child's going to go to school and it's a clear cut, where you're home and now you're at school, we know how to orient ourselves. We know that when we go into a restaurant, we behave a certain way. It's not like you're eating in the couch at your house, right? So we know how to adjust ourselves to our environment. But when the environment's all in the same, then you need to be very clear on what the expectations are. So that's number one, is be clear, be less suggestive, and more confident and assertive. It's a firm but fair type of communication style. It's no, we stop playing guess what's in my head, right? A lot of parents play guess what's in their head. They do, no, I don't know. What do you think? They don't know. They're asking you. They're asking you because they don't know. So guide them, right? That's a great question. Where can we find the answers to that? Or, that's an animal. We have an animal book. Let's go look in the animal book. Guide their thinking rather than, oh, I don't know. What do you think? Or, Alexa, like, guide their thinking, be clear on what you're expecting of them. Hey, it is time for bed, right? This is what we do. Clarity of expectation, super, super important. And then the second one, alongside with the environment and the clarity in the environment, because the environment helps the expectations be even more clear to the child. Similar to going to, we go to my uncle's house or we go to my grandma's house and I behave that way at grandma's and I behave this way in my house. You got to replicate that. So separating play spaces, this is a big one, from learning spaces. When your child's around 2, they're getting a little bit closer. Before then, doesn't matter as much, but right around 2, starting that separation so the child clearly knows how to conduct themselves, right? This is open ended. Go for it. La, 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 la. And this over here requires more self discipline. It requires me learning how to tend to a lesson. It requires me learning how to be more self directed. So, separating the learning space from like a general open ended have at it is going to be very helpful. So, expectations and separation of spaces, right? That will be very helpful in preparing for.
Perfect. Let's go to the role of the adult, of the
Perfect.
parent.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be a prepared adult, and how can parents develop this mindset already during the toddler years?
I love this question because I think that this is something that people assume right off the bat, like that they know what it means, like that it's just a general, that just means I have everything that I need to to do my work. And in the traditional mindset, that means you have a curriculum to follow, right? Because traditional education follows a curriculum, not the child. But in Montessori, being a prepared adult means that you are approaching your child's development with intentionality, with mindfulness, and with a commitment to your own personal growth. And I know sometimes that may sound a little bit ambiguous, but that's what it means. It means that you are approaching that development very intentionally. You're not just taking information and, trying to replicate and tips and tricks it all the way through. Like, how do I get my child? How do I do that is kind of like a quick fix mindset, a very outcome focused mindset, which is typical of those of us who grow up in traditional schools. And because that's what we learn, right? We learn by getting information, by memorizing information, taking a test, that I get an A. What's the outcome? What's the outcome? And the outcome is what's going to tell me whether or not I'm doing it right. If I got an A, then I'm smart. If I got a D, then I'm not smart, right? And that's usually how we assess things. And so when we approach our own preparation, we approach it in the same way. Give me all the information. I'm going to go do it with my child. That's my test. And if the child's able to do it, then I got an A, then I'm doing it right. And if they're not, then I got a D and I got to go back and read it again and memorize it again and take the test again. And it's kind of like this rut of how you understand what learning is and confusing learning with memorization or information acquiring. You know what I mean? So the prepared adult isn't simply a teacher or a parent. They are a guide. They're somebody who actively models these values, these behaviors that they want to instill in their child. It's a person who is constantly working on becoming who they hope their child becomes. And that is so much bigger than just a curriculum. And just by saying that, you can tell that it involves a lot of healing, a lot in a strong commitment to yourself. And that is exactly what Maria Montessori meant when she talks about the spiritual preparation of the adult and why that is the most important. So I'm just going to give you some four elements. I'm not going to describe it, but here's some elements of being a prepared adult. Your mindset growth, right? How you view your own learning and how that influences your child's learning. Your own level of emotional regulation. That's number two, right? Does your toddlers, for example, mirror the emotions of their caregivers? So your own emotional regulation, your observation skills of learning how to actually observe without judgment. That's really hard because we judge because we think we know it all, because we feel that as adults we should. Yeah. And then consistency and predictability. Toddlers and all children thrive on routine. They thrive on consistency. And that's not just doing the same thing over and over. It's about having a caregiver who is consistent emotionally, who is somebody that's dependable, who is somebody that they know is going to respond to their needs, not react to them. And then the last one is developing this respect um, for the process, the child's process. We get because we're so outcome focused, we're looking for that A, we're looking for the gold star, we're looking for the validation that we're doing it right. We get so stuck over here on the outcome that sometimes we neglect this process. So it's a shift from here to what's going on with my child and respecting their timeline versus some standard that we have in the head. So it's pretty deep, I think, the prepared adult.
Of course, it is. How important is parent education for those considering Montessori homeschooling? And where should I start if I want to start homeschooling?
Yeah. So I'm gonna be a little bit like dramatic in my delivery of the answer of the answer of this question because it is so important. It is um absolutely critical. Okay. Um, to those who are considering homeschooling, to invest in your education. Parent education is absolutely critical when you're considering homeschooling. In fact, it's the entire foundation. It's the entire foundation upon which authentic Montessori experience is built. It's very important. Montessori is much more than getting a curriculum and, like I said, checking things off. We already did spooning. We've already done spooning 6 times. Like, what else am I going to do? It's not about your to-do list and it's not about following a curriculum, which is what traditional education tells you that educating the child is. So it literally is a way of seeing and understanding childhood and development. So to guide your child effectively, you need to prepare yourself with the knowledge, mindset, and the skills that make Montessori unique, right? And parent education is so important because it Montessori requires a shift in perspective. And the only way in which we are enlightened to something new is through education. Actually, that's probably the definition of education is, or one of them is enlightenment into something new. And it is it is a mistake to say that I'm going to do Montessori and make it fit into my existing reality. That's just not the case. You really do need to go through a paradigm shift to really understand and interpret the information that is being presented to you um, properly, because Montessori is often very misunderstood. It's very oversimplified, and without the education, it's very easy to conflate Montessori inspired practices with Montessori. And then you throw it out the window and you say, well, we tried it. It didn't work for us. But it wasn't that it didn't work for you, because it's not going to fit into your reality. You need to have that growth mindset. You need to love learning. You want your child to love learning? You must also learn to love learning so that you can transform into a Montessorian. So it is very, very, very important.
What are the most common challenges that parents face when transitioning to homeschooling? And how can we prepare for these?
And how can you prepare for them, right? Yeah, it's in the toddler years. Yes. So transitioning to homeschooling in general is one paradigm shift. Montessori homeschooling is a whole other it's a whole other layer, which goes back to the importance of your preparation. Um, it being much more about you, the adult, than it is for the child. The child's going to follow suit to whatever it is that you do, they're going to follow suit, right? So it really is much more about you than it is about the child. So I think that that's the first challenge. The first challenge is really about shifting that shift from a traditional mindset to a Montessori philosophy. Many parents find it very difficult to let go of traditional schooling ideas. Now, and traditional schooling ideas like standards or the way that you assess, the way that you give a lesson, right? Teacher led versus um, a work of collaboration, right? They have a really hard time not having a checklist and having somebody tell them what to do, because again, in our own schooling, that's what it was. Open your book to page 5, but put your finger on line 2, answer these 5 questions, and regret that you're following instructions. And so we think that giving instructions is teaching. And that is it's really difficult to unlearn. The good thing is that homeschooling gives you a very unique, and it actually, in my opinion, makes it easier. And this is as somebody, I myself worked in a classroom. I was also a director, training teachers and things like that. But in my opinion, it's much easier to do it in the home, because the homeschooling environment doesn't operate under the umbrella of the system, right? And tackling an entire system is a lot harder, right? To change that mindset, because you kind of have to compromise, right? When you're a new teacher, you start teaching Montessori, and you kind of have to compromise. If you're, especially for example, in a public Montessori school, like there are here in the United States, um, the public Montessori school still gets government funding, which means that you still have to take those tests and you still have to pass those tests. And those tests are based on what? Standards. And are the standards, do they follow child development? No, they follow political interests, right? And so you have to negotiate with yourself as a teacher. Like, what am I teaching? You kind of have to do a little bit of both, and it's a constant compromise. And when you're homeschooling, you don't. So it is still a challenge, right? But it is, I feel it happens a lot a little bit more quickly. So you have to go through this deschooling process that that a lot of homeschoolers talk about. And then while you're educating yourself, if you're able to deschool and educate yourself, which can happen simultaneously, it's like unlearning to relearn. And you educate yourself on the principles, like the planes of development, the sensitive periods, observation. If you educate yourself on how, truly understanding how Montessori works and how it focuses on growth and child development rather than these benchmarks, then it's easier to make that shift. There's other challenges as well. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about those, but um, for your viewers that are watching this, hopefully maybe this is some validation that maybe what they're experiencing is not as uncommon. So another challenge is that they're overwhelmed. There's an overwhelm with materials in the environment. A lot of time we parents feel very pressured to create this like Pinterest perfect Montessori environment. In fact, all of the homeschoolers that I work with do way more for their children than any teacher that I ever coached in a classroom did. So there's this pressure of finding all the right materials. And a good solution for that is to start small and to focus on some essentials, which are not the materials actually. They're practical life activities. There's practical life again. And having a few quality materials are more important. A third challenge is balancing homeschooling education with responsibilities. This is not common. This is not unique to Montessori. It's just homeschooling in general. Because you're not just educating your child, you have household tasks, you have work if you're working full time, like I am, right? You're running your business, whatever it may be. And then you have personal needs that might feel kind of daunting. Um, so that's one. And what you can do to overcome that is to prioritize a 3-hour work cycle. And I know there's this is like an unpopular opinion, but this is the hill that I die on. When you're homeschooling, it's so important because when you have that, then this pressure of every moment is a teachable moment goes away. You could be mom the rest of the time. You could be business owner. I have clients who are ER nurses, who are lawyers, who are doctors. We're multifaceted. This idea that everything is learning and that, you know, just look at the moment and make it work is overwhelming for a homeschooler. Set the 3 hours, put it on your calendar, show up, be present, don't do anything else. We're not doing laundry during that time. We're not doing anything else. Anchor yourself in your homeschool day, and balancing everything else becomes exponentially easier. Exponentially. It's like if someone's watching this, they probably even feel the weight coming off of their shoulder because it is. It really is. Number 4 is the inconsistency on work cycles, routines. That's really difficult. Um, a lot of challenges are self-doubt, not fear of not doing it right. Um, Socialization is a big one, is a very big one. I think that's just a stereotype from like the 70s that hasn't left homeschoolers. Stuck, 50 years later. But it's a concern. There's a lot of comparison culture that's going on with social media. That's also a challenge um, that can make you feel inadequate. And going back to the original question, what can you do to prepare yourself now? Educate yourself. That's what you could do. Educate yourself. Establish a vision. What is my vision? I always tell people, if I were to give you a magic wand, here's my magic wand. Bippity boppity boop, boop. In 6 months, you can have your ideal homeschooling space. What would that look like? Write it down. Strawberry garden, white picket fence, rose-colored lenses. What is it? When you're clear on what you want, rather than getting stuck on what's going on here, and you're clear on your goals, you can much more reliably get to where you want to be, and you will discover very quickly that you can't get there without educating yourself. And you'll stop wasting time and money on comforting narratives of DIYing and this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
So it's important.
Thank you. Now, I would like to ask you, like where you can invite parents to come
Perfect.
to your website or to your courses, what do you offer?
Sure. So I offer a few things, but I think that the most impactful and transformative has been, and honestly accessible because we just introduced tiered pricing. I'm really excited. Is the Montessori Homeschool Academy. And the Montessori Homeschool Academy is very quickly becoming, I want you to think of it more like a training center for homeschoolers, more than like a course that where you get theme units and this and the other and conversations. It really is, it teaches you how to make all this happen. And we've talked a lot about what to do. What can I do to prepare? How important is education? But it's a matter of how do you do it? And so what the Montessori Homeschool Academy does is teach you how. And now I have a partnership with the Authentic Institute for Montessori, which is a MACD accredited training center. And the Montessori Homeschool Academy has become the only um, training and implementation program that is specifically made for homeschoolers to offer MACD accredited albums and video lesson demonstrations. And so now you can actually get the how, which is the original program, and the what, both of them together, the how and the what. So I think it's important to clarify what that means because, again, traditional mindset shift is a challenge for a lot of people. So in Montessori, this is one of my albums. This is from lower elementary, 6 to 9, and this is just geography. So all of the lessons of just geography, 6, 7, 8, 9, are all in here. And a Montessori curriculum is not used, or albums, is not used like a traditional curriculum. It's used more like a manual, right? And there's 9 of them, or 7 to 9, depending on your training center, of them in lower elementary. A lot of parents buy the curriculum and they're like, I'm just going to follow, and that's all I need. If I were to hand this over to you and I said, here you go, there it is, all of it. You even have the little templates. Go for it. What's your next question going to be?
What
How?
should I do with it? How do I how do I start?
How do I do this? And then as you're trying to do it, because you're just going to imitate whatever you see on a video on YouTube, you're going to be like, well, but I have laundry and I have this and I've got that and I've got this and what about work and what about, and all these questions. And so that's what the Montessori Homeschool Academy is. So it's really great. And you can go to the montessori-teacher.com and click on Montessori Homeschool Training, or you can Google the Montessori Homeschool Academy, and you can do that as well. There's payment plans that are as low as $195 a month. What? I know. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about it. And these are skills that you learn, and it stays with you because this is going to change. So I don't know. I think it's very exciting. I don't think it's been this accessible before. So yay. Thank you for giving me the platform to talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. And thank you for the whole interview.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure to listen to you. It was fun. It was lively. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. That you enjoyed it. And thank
Thank
you
you,
so much, friend.
Linda.
I'll talk to you soon.